made available for free by the federal government, only 47,000 of those were actually administered. And so the catch here is that there's not that much COVID comparatively in the country right now, right? So we're not saying there's about 40,000, more than 40,000 cases a day right now. No one's saying that every single one of those people should be prescribed Paxlovid, but when you're looking at the numbers, of several hundred deaths per day, still every day, those people most likely could benefit from getting this prescription. And so that's kind of the gap we're trying to fill. It's hard to say whether it's because those people, again, don't have access to testing, they don't have the knowledge to go get tested, they don't have access to a provider who can write them this prescription, or they don't have access to the pills themselves, they live in a pharmacy desert or something. So it's a number of problems that the Biden administration is trying to tackle here, mostly through making them available at more locations, more pharmacies, and then public and provider information. But it is a tricky, it's a really effective pill. Right. It's just tricky to make sure it gets to the people that it needs to.
Yeah, and giving the pharmacies access to being able to order the product themselves, I think there's currently about 20,000 pharmacies that are kind of in that. So they're hoping that would double. Just so we know, what is the current criteria that you have to qualify for the use of these pills? Because I know you have to test positive, you have to start developing those symptoms, and then you can start using the course of treatment. But are there any other requirements that you need to meet for this?
So, triple check me on this, but I believe you have to be 12 or older. And they are reserved for people who are at risk of developing severe disease or at higher risk. And so, that's a pretty broad spectrum, though. There are people who should not take Paxlovid, and that's something that's part of why doctors need to prescribe them, because, you have to run through a checklist of possible drug interactions and things like that. But most people, especially if you're an adult or, 12 and up, at risk and you're worried about, your underlying condition or your age, leading to severe disease, any of those people can get it, as long as you don't have as long as you're not on something else that could have a bad interaction.
All right. Well, as we keep moving to this next phase of the pandemic and living with it, and we know vaccines have kind of stalled out at the moment, as people getting more. So this is the next thing that the administration is looking to, just to make them more widely available. Caitlin Owens, healthcare reporter at Axios. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on Kfi Am 640 and everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'll be back with some more top stories from the week, but first, let's get an update from the KFI newsroom.
KFI, news on the hour, on the half, and when it breaks. I'm Brian Berman from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Russian troops not to fight in Ukraine. Zelensky spoke in Russian during a portion of his nightly video address. He said Russia has been recruiting new troops with little motivation and little combat experience. He accused Russian commanders of lying to these soldiers. Zelensky said Russian commanders fully understand that thousands of the soldiers will die and thousands more will be wounded in the coming weeks. Zelensky said Russian soldiers can still save their own lives. He said it's better for them to survive in Russia than to die in Ukraine. Former Idaho State lawmaker Aaron Von Ellinger has been found guilty of rape. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days before making the decision Friday. The case started last spring when a young intern reported that she had been sexually assaulted in the lawmaker's apartment after they had dinner at a restaurant in 2021. Ellinger could face life in prison. SoCal weather from KFI brought to you by Save Our Water. Cloudy skies overnight, then sunny by the afternoon. Low 60s at the beaches, low to mid 70s in Metro LA and OC, mid to upper 70s in the inland valleys, and mid 70s to low 80s in the Inland Empire. We lead local from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. I'm Brian Baruma.
Headed through Carson, trouble on the 405 northbound at Wilmington Avenue. Got a crash blocking the off-ramp. Watch for slowing as you make your way through the area. North Hills, earlier crash on the 405 southbound at Nordoff Street. Looks like that's still blocking the carpool in left lane. Watch for slowing there as well. Earlier crash cleared in Long Beach on the 710 northbound before Alondra. Everything now in the center divider. 710 southbound at the 105 had an earlier crash cleared there as well. KFI in the sky helps get you there faster. I'm Dave Joseph.
Water plants, not pavement. Adjusting your sprinklers and adding drip irrigation helps you water only where you need to. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more water-saving tips. That's SaveOurWater.com. Let's all do our part. Save water. Save California.
From the host of the hit true crime podcast, Dr. Death and Bad Batch, comes a brand new, unbelievable story. Sympathy Payne investigates the shocking tale of one woman, a former nurse, who spent nearly 20 years faking illnesses and tragedies until her victims confronted her on national television.
Sarah DeLashmit told people she had leukemia or muscular dystrophy, even Ebola.
She knew enough to be convincing, but it was all a lie. Listen to Sympathy Payne on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the great rivalry matchups is coming to town. It's the San Francisco Giants battling the Boys in Blue during a two-game series at Dodger Stadium, May 3rd and 4th at 7:10. For tickets, visit Dodgers.com/tickets.
I'm attorney Darren Kavanoki from 1-800-NO-CUFFS. Can you do the alphabet backwards? Z, Y, X, W, V. Yeah, try doing that by the side of the road. So if you get pulled over, don't wing it. Call us at 1-800-NO-CUFFS.
Springfest is on at Lowe's. And with aisles of savings on lawn and garden and appliances, you'll find exactly what you need for spring. Lowe's, home to any budget, home to any possibility.
You wouldn't trust a butcher to babysit your pet pig. You wouldn't trust a lumberjack to repair your antique. Or a professional wrestler to be your massage therapist. So why would you trust anyone but AMCO to fix your car? For over 50 years, we've been the trusted experts in transmission repair. Check engine light on? We'll check it for free. Limited time offer. Restrictions and exclusions apply. See participating centers for full details. AA, NCO.
That's what I'm saying. He's a dilettante. A dilettante's a good word. Now, I know it. I don't have to spell the fancy words I use.
Weekdays 2 to 6 on KFI. KFI. AM 640. KFI. AM 640. KFI. AM 640. More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Here's a fun story about the military's long relationship with the Jeep, specifically the World War II Jeep. In 1940, the Army was taking bids for a new military vehicle and settled on a design by the Willys Overland Company that would be produced by Ford. How it got its name? The common belief is that it comes from the abbreviation of GT, which is a common term for any military vehicle. The Jeep has even driven up to Capitol steps. For more on how the Jeep became America's favorite military vehicle, we'll speak to Miranda Summers-Lowe, contributor to Passion Purpose.
Well, first of all, it really is amazing how much the Jeep is just beloved, iconic, right? For a piece of equipment, the Jeep has really remained just something that not just military personnel, but all Americans know about and have this affection for.
Definitely. They have their own special Jeep wave when Jeep owners drive by each other.
Well, and it's sort of something that people stick with, right? Like once you become a Jeep person, it's kind of incredible in that in researching this, to find out how many different possibilities there could have been for the Jeep. Kind of starting in World War I when cars and vehicles first come on the market, and of course there are different groups of people that want different things. Do you want a big truck that can carry a lot of things? Do you want a small car that is fast, or do you want something that is kind of all terrain and can move through a lot of things? So there's like a lot of contention sort of going through as this gets developed, including some of my personal favorites, like there were so many carts that were being pulled by horses at that point. So, why not just make a cart that moves on its own and kind of looks like a lawnmower? Or, when you go to shoot or, a lot of these operations, you lie down on your belly. So, sort of one rejected concept was making the belly flopper. And it was sort of like a motorized pallet that you'd lie down on, and then, as the soldier moved from position to position, the whole vehicle would just move with it.
Exactly. And, along the way, right, so it took all these little inspirations from those things, like you said in the article, tractors and lawnmowers, this belly flopper thing. It took all of those inspirations and it kind of started becoming, the Jeep, it met all the requirements, the criteria that the military needed at the time. Let's talk a little bit about the name Jeep, too, because that's a pretty fun part. As you mentioned, it almost was called the belly flopper. There's all sorts of different things to it. They called it, blitz buggy, puddle jumper, midget, heat. And probably where it really came from, I guess you mentioned World War I grease monkeys had a term for military vehicles, GP, and that's probably where it came from.
Yeah, Yeah, so GT, you know, general purpose, kind of runs together like Jeep, and that nickname seems to be around before the particular truck we talk about. But one thing I learned researching this story is that term got used for a lot of other things, like aircraft, which I hadn't realized. Even through World War II, some members of the Army Air Corps refused to call the Jeep a Jeep because they had a plane that they called Jeep. So they called them Peeps, like the little marshmallow snack.
That's pretty good. Yeah, and then inside the military, I guess they were going back and forth on which one was the right one, what they would call it. When they finally, the military said, okay, we want to manufacture these things. I guess they said, we're going to give out this contract to whoever can do it. There was 135 automakers at that time. Only 2 agreed to submit proposals. So right away, that limited right there. And I guess they wanted 70 vehicles to be produced in just 75 days. So that's really tough, probably why a lot of them backed out. But tell us who came through with the final design here.
Sure. So, yeah, you gotta appreciate how quickly this came together, that when they finally decided it was worth kind of doing, a small truck that we kind of think of as being a Jeep now. Two different companies put in proposals, so the Bantam Company and Willys Overland. And at that point, Willys was well known to the Army because they made a lot of artillery carts and carriages, but, wouldn't necessarily be who you would think would make this vehicle. But once there were 2 prototypes, the Bantam and the Willys, it kind of became clear that even though the Willys proposal came in late, and overweight because they had put an oversized engine in it. In field testing, the oversized engine did fantastic, and everyone was loving it. But the problem with that is Willys didn't actually have the capacity to make the number of trucks that the Army was hoping for. So, in one of those great moments of history, there's a chance meeting in Washington, D.C., where one of the undersecretaries who was working on this undersecretary to the Army saw Edsel Ford himself and asked if he would, agree to a special deal where Ford would, agree to help Willys produce this. So a lot of the original Jeeps have that Willys label on it, but were actually made by Ford.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it carries on to this day, right? There are still certain model trims of the Jeep that go by the Willys name. You can see them, sometimes you'll see it, they'll say Rubicon on the front, on the hood, but sometimes they'll say Willys on them too, so they're all there. And then from then on, just kind of how do you get it funded? Part of this whole thing is there's a lot of great classic pictures that you have on the article on the website showing the Jeep from, when it started in World War II and beyond, and the Jeep riding on the Capitol steps, how it plays into pop culture. There was a bunch of songs about it, Ford Jills in a Jeep and movies. It really took off after that.
Absolutely. And one of the funnest things I found when I went to, I saw that picture of, the Army came to actually put Jeeps out in front of the Capitol building, and they gave members of Congress the chance to drive it up and down the Capitol steps. But it was hard to pick which pictures because there were so many. It was obvious that even at that point, before it was in mass production, every senator and congressman who got to drive this was just having a blast and got their picture taken.
Yeah, I think the picture you ended up putting in there was Senator Meade of New York, and he's just like waving back the camera with his hand up, big smile on his face, and a few service members in the back seat, and that definitely looks like fun. And just kind of this whole trajectory, right? It just really was being used, I guess, for military purposes too, but just like the service members coming back home, so did the Jeep. And, it obviously has its big history now in the States and all, but it came back and went back to its tractor roots, pulling threshers and plows, and was used to be converted for like mini firefighting trucks. So it got a ton of use. Miranda Summers Lowe, contributor to Task and Purpose. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on KFI Am 640. When we come back, we'll tell you about a man who is a hyper polyglot. He can speak over 24 languages.
There's really no place more exciting to live than Southern California. Whether you're looking for a day at the beach, a hike in the mountains, or my favorite, a trip out to the desert, you're always a quick drive away from an adventure. Wherever you choose to go, make the journey as memorable as the destination in one of 5 SUVs from Volkswagen. Choose from the versatile Tiguan SUV with spacious cargo rooms, the compact Taos SUV with VW digital cockpit, the all-electric ID4 SUV with intuitive voice control, or the family-friendly Atlas and the stylish Atlas Cross 4 SUVs, recently ranked number 1 and 2 for the lowest cost of maintenance among midsize SUVs. Get started on your next adventure and head to your local Southern California Volkswagen dealer today to get behind the wheel of one of these 5 inspiring SUVs.
Cost of maintenance claim based on the model level analysis of 2022 midsize SUVs performed by Concentric LLC on February 2nd, 2022. Comparison versus Honda Passport and Pilot, Toyota Highlander, and 4Runner. In Subaru with Sent and Outback. Assumes 5 years, 75,000 miles of operation. Does not include repair costs.
Naloxone can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose and save a life. It's easy to get and easy to use. If you or someone you know is at risk of overdose, keep naloxone on you and at home. Learn more at cdc.gov/stop-overdose.
Leaving a child in a hot vehicle can lead to their death very quickly. Set cell phone reminders or place something you'll need in the back seat so you don't forget your child is in the car. Look for your baby before you lock. Paid for by NHTSA.
Portions of the following program will be recorded.
Can I homeschool my daughter through college? Is that...
Yeah, I'll come over and help.
Okay. What class would you teach?
I would teach,
Gary and Shannon.
what's the wine tasting?
Wine tasting? Weekdays at 10 a.m. on KFI.
Where are they going to plant all these trees? Well, where there isn't shade. In fact, it says some parts of the city are shade deprived. This is what they do with their time.
John and Ken.
Garcetti and his administration is brain deprived.
Weekdays 2 to 6 on KFI.
The problem is, the expectation I have for my governor is that he worries about simple things. There's a couple of very simple things that you can do to keep California great.
You have to walk before you run, Gaz.
Gary and Shannon. Weekdays at 10 a.m. on KFI.
How about somebody speak to the normal people?
How about somebody tell the truth?
Normal people don't want mental patients, drug addicts, and pedophiles sleeping in cars in front of their kids' schools. Why can't anyone say that out loud?
John and Ken. Weekdays 2 to 6 on KFI.
I don't know why they can't say we killed him, we shot him and he's in the hospital, we tackled him and he's in jail.
Let's neutralize it.
Yeah, you're right. They should say we tackled him with his custody or we killed him.
How do you know when in law enforcement or government just speaks English?
John and Ken.
Tell me what it is. Weekdays 2 to 6 on KFI.
So I say, this show is lit. What does it mean to you?
Lit. It is bad.
Gary and Shannon.
I'm going back to the original.
Perfect. That was super hip. All of that.
Weekdays at 10 a.m.
Lit show is bad.
on KFI.
See, it's politics. That's all it is. That's all we do. It's politics. There's no decision to be made. In a few minutes, I'm going to the restroom. I'm going to choose the men's room. That's a political decision. I may be accused of hyperbole, but how much?
Bill Handel.
Not much.
Mornings from 6 to 10 on KFI.
That one I'm entrusted myself with. Sometimes I'm not. Most of the time I'm not. That, handle you're damn good at this. I'm telling you, I'm thinking to myself now. Tell you, you know what? Let's take a break. I'll just keep on congratulating myself.
Great human being. Bill Handel.
So smart.
Mornings from 6 to 10. KFI.
I was at a Starbucks, and my sister was calling me.
And I looked at it and I didn't ignore
But I didn't realize it.
She was also in Starbucks. We one of the bridesmaids. The Conway Jr. Show.
That was a tough one to get out of.
Weeknights at 6 on KFI.
Why don't people listen to us? The listeners listen to us. Just listen to us. Follow our lead. We know what we're talking about.
John and Ken. Weekdays 2 to 6 on KFI.
I know the weight of the world seems to rest on your shoulders, and sometimes life seems like it's filled only with confusion and chaos. But I assure you, I have a plan for you.
The Jesus Christ Show. This morning at 6 on KFI. AM 640.
More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Finally, for this week, we'll tell you about a man named Vaughn Smith, who cleans carpets for a living. Vaughn is also a hyper-polyglot. A hyper-polyglot is someone who can speak 11 languages or more, but Vaughn is special. By his count, he can speak close to 37 languages. To see what makes his brain tick, he decided to undergo an MRI at MIT, and his brain does not function like that of a monolingual person. For more on what drove him to learn so many languages, we'll speak to Jessica Contreras, reporter, Washington Post.
When I first heard that there was this guy out there and he could speak, more than 24 languages, I, of course, was like a little skeptical.
Right.
But it turns out that some people, they really have this ability. There have been a number of what we call hyperpolyglots documented throughout history and living today. And even though Vaughn, definitely does not flaunt this and doesn't necessarily even really tell people about it, I've seen him in action using his language skills, and it's just completely remarkable. So yes, he has about 24 languages that he can carry on lengthy conversations in. And when I asked him to please count all of his languages that he knows, at least the basics in, the number was just over 40.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And in talking to him and, doing the write-up on all this, you kind of come to understand maybe why he wanted to learn all this. So, he really has this deep need for wanting to understand other people, multiple people. And in learning the language, learning where the people come from themselves, learning more about the person, even the person on the other end feels good about it, right? It's almost seeing them for a sense of worth that they might not have had before, just because he takes so much interest in who they are and the language that they know. Let's talk a little bit about more of those languages, though. So he's fluent in at least 8. He says fluent. So that's English, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Czech, Slovak, Bulgarian, and Romanian. Those are his top ones. But he's got so much other languages under his belt.
One of the most interesting things about Vaughn is he's actually very interested in indigenous languages. So there are a lot of languages that have died out in our world, and there are many that are still endangered. And so he has spent part of his time investing in those languages, some that are more well known, like in Nahuatl in Mexico, and some that are really spoken by a small number of people. So one of his favorite languages is the Salish language, which is spoken by a group of people in Montana, and they have really welcomed Ron into their community. He didn't just sort of read this on the internet. He actually has been to Montana multiple times, been to the reservation where there is a language school for Salish, and he's constantly working to improve his Salish skills, and really try to spread love of indigenous and native languages to all different kinds of people, to show them that they have value, that he values them, and it's really infectious to watch.
Definitely. And who, Vaughn Smith as a person, where does he come from? Where does he live? What set him off to kind of learn so many languages at a young age?
So Vaughn grew up in and around Washington, D.C., which really he credits as a huge reason for how he was able to have exposure to so many languages. Of course, there are people from all around the world who live here in the D.C. community, and particularly when he was in high school, he had already sort of realized he had this affinity for language. And, as we talked about, I think what Vaughn wants is what everyone wants, is to feel connected to the people around them. And in a lot of ways, Vaughn did struggle with that. He realized later in life that he is most likely on the autism spectrum, and so certain things like social cues, are a little bit more difficult for him. But through languages, he really offers him an ability to connect with all different kinds of people. So at his high school, where there were many different groups of students from around the world, he used languages as a way to become friends with different groups of people. So by the time he was finishing up high school, he already was working on Amharic, Russian, he was working on Romanian, he was already amassing a huge amount of languages, as well as, his native languages, which are both English and Spanish.
There's a video on the website for this story. Within the story, you have a bunch of clips of him speaking, whatever language, insert language here, right? You have him speaking all sorts of stuff. But one thing that I did find interesting, right, is his English accent, let's say. There is really no accent. It's very neutral. And you would think somebody speaking so many languages, some stuff might have rubbed off or anything. But yeah, his English accent is very neutral. What did you think of that?
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting observation, especially because something that Vaughn does incredibly well from the people I've talked to is called like accent reproduction. So if he were to ask you, how do you say, what are we having for dinner in Lithuanian? And a Lithuanian speaker said the sentence back to him, he would be able to replicate it almost perfectly. And so all of these different people that I watched him interact with, they were just amazed by his accent reproduction and the accuracy of his accent. Now, that's not to say he's perfect in all of them by any means, but when, for example, we were in a Starbucks and he befriended some people, he heard their accent, his friend went up to them and they started talking, we learned that they spoke Dutch, and so he started speaking in Dutch with them, and they were just totally amazed that he's never been to the Netherlands. In fact, he's never traveled really much at all, except for Mexico and a very brief trip to Belgium. Otherwise, he has not been to a lot of these places, but his accent in those languages is really remarkable.
All right, let's talk about his brain now, because one of the curiosities, right, is how can somebody know so much? How can he carry on so many languages fluently and really connect with people on those deeper levels, in languages not native to him? So the question was, is something different about his brain? You accompanied him to MIT where they did a brain scan on him. They played languages and kind of watched how his brain was firing off, and some interesting things came out of it, because you also got your brain scan too, and what you basically learn is that his brain isn't working as hard as someone like you, maybe myself, who I know English and Spanish, and that's pretty much it, but his brain isn't working as hard as ours would be.
That's right. So basically, what we wanted to know from the folks at MIT who have been studying how the brains make language is essentially if his brain looks different than my brain or just any other monolingual brain. I myself, I've really struggled always to learn language, and now I realize maybe I sort of have been popping out a little bit and just saying, it's difficult for me, so I don't have the time to do it as much as I would love to. But what I've learned, from Vaughn is that, it doesn't matter if you do it perfectly when you try. You really are showing someone a sign of respect. And so I watched Vaughn do this over and over again. I really wanted to know what was happening in his brain. So yes, what we learned from Evelina Fedorenko at MIT and our graduate students was that when you look at our brains under an fMRI machine and you put us through tests that show, we were sort of reading English words, and when you see a word that has meaning in English, those language areas of our brains would light up on the screen essentially by checking the blood flow in our brains. And it became very clear when we analyzed the results that Vaughn's language areas are incredibly small, which is a little bit counterintuitive, right? You would think, they're going to be big because they are storing so much information, but how it actually works is sort of like a muscle. It's because he's so efficient, right? He doesn't need to use that much of his brain in order to do the task of comprehending a language, whereas I need to use a larger part of my brain. His language areas are very small and they're very efficient.
It's very interesting, and just kind of going along with the theme of this, he's so